Duawu, Neche Necheru, Dua Yaku. This is Osahiru Ma'at of the White Lotus Temple, coming to you live from St. Lucia. I have been compelled to share this dissertation, which was written by, well, I do not have the name of the author, unfortunately. I copied this text quite some time ago, and it's very difficult to find it again. But this dissertation I am going to read chapter by chapter, hopefully to edify the Rastafari brethren and sistren as to the authentication of Haile Selassie I as our divine figure through the eyes of our African cosmology and not through the Judeo-Christian biblical narrative. So I shall begin Chapter 1, Introduction to Haile Selassie I within Rastafari Thought. Adorations to Asar, Nefer, divinity, great personality, in heart of Abdu King Eternity, Lord of forever, traveling for eternities in the form, raise thee, Papyrus Savani. Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. Psalm 68, verse 31. Yeah, man, Jah live. You can't kill God. That's Bob Marley. Introduction to Rastafari Discourse of Haile Selassie I. Since the emergence of Rastafari communities within 1930s Jamaica, following the coronation of Rastafari Makonnen as Haile Selassie I, Negus, King of Ethiopia, Rastafari continuously articulate his divinity within their discourse. The earliest post-coronation writer to describe Haile Selassie I is Leonard Howell in The Promised Key, in which he asserts that Haile Selassie I has come as the living God to purify our social standards and our way of living, and rebuild and inspire our character. Prince Emmanuel Charles Edwards, elder of one of the oldest Jamaican-based Rastafari communities, the Ethiopia Africa International Congress, Nyabingi Order of Rastafari, also contributes to the post-coronation discourse on Haile Selassie I. In his text, Black Supremacy, he writes that Haile Selassie I is Jah Rastafari, the Almighty God, who is seated in Zion and reigns in the hearts of all flesh. Begun in 1947 as a support program in Harlem, New York, for Ethiopia during the Italo-Ethiopian War, the Ethiopian World Federation, EWF, conceptualizes Haile Selassie I to be the elect of God and the light of this world. This discourse about Haile Selassie I expresses the earliest attempts to identify Haile Selassie I's divine significance within the context of his coronation as Negus of Ethiopia, the only landscape in Africa that European colonizers had not demarcated. With the deposition of Selassie I in 1974 by Marxist opposition leader Mengistu Selassie Meriam, Rastafari continued to stress Selassie I's divinity despite his removal from his earthly throne. International reggae artist Robert Nesta Marley is one among many who contributes to this idea. In his song, Jah Live, Haile Selassie I is God Almighty, while in Marley's other articulations, Jah is everything in existence. The 12 Tribes of Israel community with Prophet Gad forms during the 1970s under the direction of Prophet Gad does not necessarily conceive of Haile Selassie I as God. They conceive of him as the return of Christ in flesh, and often interchange the term Christ with Haile Selassie. In an even more recent contribution to the discourse, Jah Akel, in his 1994 text, Rasta Emperor Haile Selassie, Jah Akel, writes that Rastafari conceive of Haile Selassie as omnipresent, and like Christ, he can never die. So Jah Rastafari, God Selassie, lives. undismayed by the deposition and then the reported passing of Haile Selassie I, Rastafari continued to re-articulate his divinity in light of these unfortunate changes. It seems that regardless of the passing of time, post-coronation and post-deposition, the emergence of group affiliations, the deposition and reported passing of Selassie I, Rastafari emphatically convey his divinity in text and music. While the specific nomenclature for and significance of Haile Selassie I may vary in accordance to time and affiliation, it is unquestionable that Selassie I remains central to the Rastafari way of life for more than 70 years. What scholars and thinkers on Rastafari question, what scholars and thinkers on Rastafari question, and very fervently so during the past 10 years, is the authenticity of the divinity of Selassie I within Rastafari thought. The few scholars who attempt to solve what for them is the problem of authenticity claim through Christological and apologistic approaches that Rastafari need to reconsider the possibility of his status as it is unfounded, adhering to the African axiological assumptions that everything in existence comprises the whole of existence. This writer finds value in Rastafari thought. This dissertation is therefore a response to the pronouncement that Rastafari should reconsider the possibility of Selassie I's divine status. One may argue that it is not the business of a researcher to validate a group's philosophy. As both an African-centered cosmological theorist and Rastafari adherent, we, however, propose that an African symbolic methodology provides ancient explanations for Rastafari thought. This dissertation therefore provides a preliminary argument towards authenticating Haile Selassie I as divine within Rastafari thought. By examining the extent to which the structure and origin of the universe continues to influence our historical and contemporary quest to return to a human consciousness that is expressive of optimal thinking and behaving, we argue that when Rastafari recognize Selassie I as divine, they are in fact remembering, that is, recognizing and being, an example of the most ancient ways in which optimal thinking and behaving manifests in human consciousness and therefore human representation. Remembering among the Rastafari, however, is inextricably linked to a clear trajectory of pre-coronation philosophical ideas and develop in accordance with our quest to return to optimal thinking and behaving as a result of the cosmohistoric Ma'afa, the Great Destruction. A key contributor to what we can refer to as pre-coronation Rastafari thought is, of course, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, under the umbrella of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, which he initially establishes in Jamaica in 1914 and later in Harlem, New York in 1917. Garvey encourages homeland and diasporan Africans to remember themselves as comprising the African world and to actively struggle for the decolonization of Africa. He suggests in the tradition of his Ethiopianist predecessors and contemporaries that African people can meet the organization's objectives if Africans are willing to struggle for an independent Africa under the guidance of the God of Ethiopia. Lecturing to his organization, writing in the Negro World and the Black Man between 1914 and 1930, Garvey reiterates that we Negroes believe in the God of Ethiopia, the everlasting God, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, and one God of all ages. That is the God in whom we believe, but we shall worship him through the spectacles of Ethiopia. For Garvey, the God of Ethiopia soon emerges as the symbol of not only the coming decolonization of Africa, but the possibility of collectivizing the consciousness of homeland and diasporan Africans to achieve their spiritual, political, and economic liberation. When Rastafari Makonnen emerges in 1930 as the only sovereign leader from within colonized Africa and claims a direct lineage to and an uninterrupted rulership from biblical King Solomon of Jerusalem and Queen Makeda of Ethiopia, early Rastafari architects Leonard Howell, Archibald Dunkley, Joseph Herbert unapologetically view Haile Selassie I as the god of Ethiopia, whom Garvey prophesizes. Garvey's call for homeland and diasporan Africans to look to Ethiopia influences sympathetic thinkers to develop expositions and also comprise pre-coronation discourse. In 1924, Shepherd Robert Anthony Rogers publishes the Holy Pibi as the means of the liberation of Ethiopia, to the liberation of Ethiopia. In unifying his Afro-Anglican constructive church under the umbrella of the UNIA in 1924, he writes in his text that he wants to encourage the establishment of heaven on earth under the God of Ethiopia. In 1926, Reverend Fitz Ballantine Petersburg and Lulu Petersburg published the Royal Parchment Scroll of Black Supremacy, which one Jamaican Gleaner newspaper writer vehemently reviews in 1927. The Petersburg's text poses a threat to the Jamaican infrastructure when they clearly articulate the idea of a living God on earth, whom has a divine relationship to the kingdom of Ethiopia and not the kingdom or queendom of England, conveying their personal interpretation of Garvey's thought that is pervasive at the time. Both Rogers and Petersburg's extend the meaning of the God of Ethiopia in ways that Garvey has not. Neither Garvey, Rogers, nor Petersburg directly discuss the significance of Haile Selassie I, nor do they name him directly as divine within their work. Yet contemporary Rastafari writers consider Garvey, Rogers, and Petersburg's writings foundation writings of Rastafari. Their works are none other than prophetic writings about the coming of the God of Ethiopia in the personage of Haile Selassie I, which Rastafari continue to use to authenticate the most central concept of figure within Rastafari thought. The problem of authenticity. Haile Selassie I for researchers on Rastafari. Social scientists and theologians pose questions concerning Rastafari thought and behavior for some time now. This has been especially the case since George Simpson's 1955 defining study entitled The Rastafari Movement in Jamaica, a study of race and class conflict, in which he explores the extent to which African Jamaicans' social conditions influence the development of Rastafari thought and behavior. While exploration of Rastafari's conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I is not central to this 1955 article, he does conclude that the movement and their thought are rather far removed from African ways of thinking. Spencer suggests that unlike the revival Zion and Kumina cults who have African overtones, because the participants believe in polytheism and revelation and intervention by spiritual beings in human affairs, Rastafari is un-African because they quote the Bible to support their doctrines, sing modified Baptist and Methodist hymns, and recite prayers to Haile Selassie I, the living God. The major contemporary scholars studying the conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I within Rastafari thought, theologians William Spencer and Clinton Chisholm, adhere to and expand upon Simpson's conclusions, using a Christological and apologistic approach respectively to examine Rastafari thought. These writers try to understand Haile Selassie's significance by either employing him as a correlate to or a corollary of Jesus, or by negating Haile Selassie I's lineage altogether. Although many Rastafari do interchange Jesus for Selassie I, while others do not, for these writers, Haile Selassie I within Rastafari thought is a historically appropriated king or blackenized symbol of Christ that only exists because Rastafari borrow, albeit incorrectly, from Christian thought. In the tradition of Simpson, What these writers conclude is that Rastafari's conceptions of Haile Selassie I fall outside of the ways in which homeland Africans think about the Creator and creation, because both Spencer and Chisholm are able to trace Rastafari thought directly from biblical misinterpretations. Rastafari thought about Selassie I is therefore conjecture and blasphemy for these theorists. Blessings, Diamond Kush. Uncle Jassonet. Statement of purpose and objectives. While I agree that questioning the centrality of Haile Selassie I within Rastafari thought is a necessary scholarly enterprise, we think researchers in this area should question that which seems the most unlikely. That is, can Rastafari thinking about Selassie I as divine in fact be an authentic perspective? We suggest that using an African symbolic methodology, one that allows for me to develop an argument by reading repetition of symbolic experiences within the pre-coronation, coronation, and post-coronation Rastafari writings, provides clearer understandings of what scholars suggest are Rastafari appropriations of Christian thought. This dissertation, therefore, is a symbolic argument exploring the authenticity of Haile Selassie I in Rastafari thought. Our overall aim is to suggest that in recognizing Haile Selassie as divine, Rastafari are in fact remembering, that is, recognizing the nature or sar in the material realm in accordance with the cycles of time. And in so doing, Rastafari are moving towards the most optimal thinking and behaving in accordance with Osar as well. A way of being in the material world that is not only described within ancient cosmology, but exists among what Sheikh Anta Diop describes as the personality characteristics predominant among the Homo sapiens residing within equatorial Africa, around 150,000 to 150,000, or what Bruce Bynum refers to as the African unconscious. This is the consciousness that the Kemetians refer to as Osar. To achieve this aim, what this dissertation proposes is that first, given that the material reality seemingly degenerates the collective body and consciousness in accordance with the cycles of time, Haile Selassie I emerges as a Ba, the soul template, or Sar, as an example of the potential for not only Rastafari, but African people to remember. That is, to think and behave in accordance with the consciousness of Osar while residing within the material realm. We suggest that Rastafari thinking about Haile Selassie I is therefore an authentic perspective, one that undoubtedly occurs in accordance with the structure and origin of the universe and the cyclical journey of African reclamation of a primordial consciousness. We use a four-step argumentation to authenticate Rastafari thought. It includes mapping the most ancient expressions of the structure and origin of the universe. 2. Revealing the functioning of Osar within the structure of the universe. 3. Reading for Osset, the Ba of nurturing and transformation in the primary writings of Garvey, Rogers, and Petersburg's, and lastly 4. Examining Howell and Rastafari teachings which reveal through our symbolic lens Rastafari conceptualization of Haile Selassie I as the Ba of Osar in human form, and in so doing begin to think and behave in accordance with the optimal thinking and behaving that Haile Selassie I cosmologically embodies. Our major research questions through which we create these four-step argumentation includes: what is the structure and origin of the universe as revealed in the most ancient written Kemetic cosmological discourse? What is the role and significance of Osar within the structure and origin of the universe? What is the relationship between Osar, the other forces comprising existence, and the cycle of time? What is the function of Garvey, Rogers, and Petersburg's writings in relationship to the process of remembering Osar, and therefore Rastafari perception about Haile Selassie I as divine? In what ways can we symbolically read Rastafari conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I within the writings of Leonard Howell, Charles Prince Emmanuel, Charles Edwards, and other Rastafari writings as a process of Rastafari not only unconsciously recognizing Osar in the form of Haile Selassie I, but moving towards in accordance with the cycles of time, thinking and behaving as the primordial consciousness, one in which Selassie I embodies and signals for Rastafari? Is Rastafari's perception of Haile Selassie I as divine, given our argumentation, an authentic perspective? Why designate the term remembering as the process through which to authenticate Haile Selassie within Rastafari thought? Furthermore, why explore if Rastafari are in fact remembering the function of the nature or Sar that the ancient Kemetians outlined within their perception of the origin, structure, and laws of the universe? Although we will address the Anunian version of Kemetic cosmology within the first step of our four-step argument, a brief note is in the order here as further explanation about what we mean by remembering. Egyptologists, antiquarians, and contemporary African-centered intellectuals indicate that one of the earliest narratives about Asar and its role within the origin and structure of the universe is the Anu, or On or Heliopolis cosmology, predating any other Kemetic narrative, including its reinterpretation as the Menefer or Memphite narrative that Shabaka reintroduces within the 25th dynasty. The Anunian scribe explanations about the structure and origin of the universe on the walls of the Merkuti or pyramids just prior to 5000 before the Common Era. Researchers suggest, however, that the Nile Valley inhabitants conceptualize what became the Anu version sometime prior to 40,000 BCE, before the Common Era. We don't say BC before Christ, we say before the Common Era. Given this cosmological data, we therefore rely on what may be the oldest documented versions concerning the conceptualization of the universe. While my sentiment is not motivated by the valorization or written over oral expressions, written documentation is one way that contemporary diasporan Africans are able to experience our ancient ways of thinking and being in the material world and what exists within the unseen world. This point is an important one because the Anu's writings represent the most ancient expressions available about the deepest truths regarding the universe and its impact on our thoughts and behavior. The process of examining the oldest written cosmology then becomes, on the one hand, a process of remembering the most ancient ways of human existence, perceives the relationships between the unseen and material realms and human cognition and behavior. The writing of this dissertation is also an example of a way to remember as it traces African thought and behavior through time and space. A cursory review of the Anunian cosmology as it further relates to the process of remembering is now in order. Contemporary African-centered theorists frequently find the Kemetic cosmology a necessary foundation to our contemporary thinking and behaving. For many thinkers assert that Osar's experiences with the cycles of leadership as unity, death and resurrection or reunification manifest within the historic and contemporary experiences of homeland and diasporan Africans. The cosmological force of Set manifests as the oppositional forces that historically enslave, disperses, and colonizes African people. In the chapter The Myth of Osar and Black Awakening, in Light from Ancient Africa, Naim Akbar explains, "We believe that the ancient Africans were telling us something about today. A group of people went to a party about 400 years ago. At the party, they were tricked and locked into the bottom of a chest or ship. The co-conspirators from England, Portugal, Holland, France, and from all parts of Europe got together and enslaved poor Osar, the one who had brought civilization, religion, science, all of the great gifts of culture to the world. So far, the images of the myth closely parallel the history of the African enslavement. The battle between Osar and Set is perpetually reoccurring cycle throughout time. At this cycle in history, we are the mutilated Osar, and our oppressors have assumed the role of Set. The collective African community is experientially remembering, or in this case, thinking and acting out the experiences of Osar in this instance. Remembering in this way occurs unconsciously, often referred to as the Ab within the Kemetic tradition, and racial memory, African consciousness, race memory, and epic memory among our African-centered theorists. This storehouse of consciousness houses the most ancient patterns for even the most contemporary thought. As a collective bank of ideas, images, and experiences based upon the structure and origin of the universe, it informs African people's thoughts, regardless of historical epochs, location, or personal intentions. In other words, the Kemetic Ab and racial memory, African consciousness, race memory, and epic memory house the enduring patterns of the structure and origin of the universe, inform African people's thoughts and behaviors. This is the case wherever we may be in the world, and includes thoughts and behaviors that may seem destructive or suboptimal. We suggest this point because Rastafari too unconsciously utilizes their African epistemology. Each Rastafari utilizes I feel phenomena, therefore I think, I know. Those who have come to deify Haile Selassie I are moved to do so because of the extent to which the forces create homeland and diasporan experiences in accordance with the cycles of time and manifest within the pre-coronation speeches and writings. What is more is that though this dissertation does not engage the historical Christian influence in the Ethiopianist tradition, nor within Rastafari thought, it is evident that the concept of Haile Selassie I emerges across historical, biblical, and cultural contexts and incites emotions for Rastafari in particular ways. Regardless, if some Rastafari view Selassie I as Jesus, God, or both, these conceptions are truth for them because they were moved to view Selassie I in these ways. The multiple interpretations do not represent inconsistency, but pieces of the overall ways Rastafari have come to know that Haile Selassie I is divine to them, which may signal the most ancient memories of that which expresses the struggle and origin of the universe. Nomenclature as Jesus, God, or other is in fact not as important as the sentiment in recognizing that a symbol of indigenous consciousness has indeed entered the material realm during a particular time and place. Since synthesizing the symbols manifesting in the material world, understanding the relationship between the symbols and understanding the unseen significance of the symbols are other ways through which homeland and diasporan Africans come to knowledge. This process is also the force of Tehuti and central to how we approach this work in two important ways. On the one hand, it is important for us to reintroduce the origin and structure of the universe because it leads to making connections between ancient priorities and coronation and post-deposition writings, which would demonstrate unchanging truths about the universe. As the initial step in our argument, the origin and structure of the universe provides clues for what scholars who write about Rastafari may consider inauthentic ways of thinking. On the other hand, this process suggests that we must also approach this work by examining pre-coronation discourse as well. Knowledge comes through synthesizing the writings of Garvey, Rogers, and Petersburg's Ethiopianist ideas within the latter writings of Leonard Howell and Prince Edward Emmanuel Charles. to gauge the relationship between what seems to be two distinct bodies of thought. Using this approach to examine the pre-coronation phase as well leads to viewing the significance of Rastafari thinking about Selassie as divine. As Rao Nefa Amen writes, the complete measurement of a thing must include its assigned place in space and time, that is, its position in relationship to all other things and the whole. The chapters therefore manifest accordingly. Chapter 2 exposes the major themes and ideas expressed within the most contemporary discourse on the form and function of Haile Selassie, written by the foremost academic writers on Rastafari thought. This exploration provides a specific backdrop informing the need for this dissertation. As the major literature leans towards negating Rastafari's deification of Haile Selassie I, or what we can say is the problem of authenticity within discourse among researchers and writers on Rastafari thought. We can also gauge the specificities of the Christian influence on Rastafari perception of Haile Selassie I, as the remaining chapters deal with developing an argument for the possibilities of remembering Osar and not the Christian Anukeru Kashanga Hetepu, God or Jesus Christ. Let's read that again. This exploration provides a specific backdrop informing the need for this dissertation, as the major literature leans towards negating Rastafari's deification of Haile Selassie I, or what we can say is the problem of authenticity within discourse among researchers and writers on Rastafari thought. We can also gauge the specificities of the Christian influence on Rastafari perception of Haile Selassie I, as the remaining chapters deal with developing as argument for the possibilities of remembering Asar and not the Christian God or Jesus Christ. The latter just becomes, as the argument unfolds, symbols that signify deeper essential truths and processes. Chapter 3 relies on primary, secondary, and tertiary Egyptological and African-centered writings to outline the Anu's origin and structure of the universe, beginning with undifferentiated existence. The objective of this chapter is to reconceptualize the origins and foundations of the universe. Writings about the Anu version of the Kemetic cosmology, written around 5000 before the Common Era, are important to this endeavor, given that this cosmology is the oldest explanations about remembering Osar as part of the structure and origin of the universe. The most influential Egyptological primary texts are Faulkner's interpretations of the Pyramid Text, Wallace Budge's The Book of the Dead or Purim Heru, which provides reinterpretations of Kemetic doctrinal writings. Of the major secondary and tertiary sources include Egyptological and African-centered writers who either translate or retranslate or reinterpret Kemetic writings. The process of remembering Osar takes precedence within Chapter 4. The objective of this chapter builds upon the themes in Chapter 3 and extends the argument that Osar adheres to the major cyclical path of Ra'atum, with the objective of Osar's rememberment in both the unseen and seen realms, sources that become helpful to theorize about Osar within the Anu cosmology. And later Kemetic writings include Muata Ashby's Anunian theology, the Osarian resurrection, the ancient Egyptian Bible, and Egyptian Book of the Dead, the philosophy of the Book of Coming Forth by Day, and Rao Nefa Amen's Metuneta Volume 1, The Great Oracle of Tahuti, and the Egyptian System of Spiritual Cultivation, and Metuneta Volume 2, and Nukosar, The Kemetic Initiation System, Malana Karenga's Husia, and Jacob Curther's Essays in Ancient Egyptian Studies. Chapter 5 traces the process of remembering Osar at the crossroads. This chapter does not trace the development of the God of Ethiopia within 18th and 19th century diasporan thought in particular, but focuses on the ways in which we can read the symbols of the movement of Osar within the primary speeches and writings of Gavi to Prince Emmanuel, shifting from the God of Ethiopia to Selassie I as God and Jesus. The macrocosmic trajectory of remembering Osar is clear. The most important writings to achieve this aim are those written by Marcus Garvey, Atlee Rogers, and Reverend Fritz and Lulu Petersburg's, and include Garvey's The Black Man, Philosophy and Opinions, edited by Jacques Garvey, and Message to the People, The Course of African Philosophy, edited by Tony Martin, for example. Shepherd Robert Atlee Rogers, The Holy Pibi, and Reverend Fitz Ballantine Petersburg's The Royal Parchment Scroll of Black Supremacy are key primary texts as well. Our concluding chapter examines the extent to which we can attempt to authenticate Rastafari thinking about Haile Selassie I as divine. Using the symbols we glean from chapters 3 and 4 and building about our argument in chapter 5, we suggest that Haile Selassie I is too the Ba of Osar, the example within the material realm that hints towards the human possibility to think and behave in accordance with the deepest primordial thinking within Africa. Through a synthesis of close readings and symbolic analysis of the limited amount of Rastafari primary sources material available, in particularly Helen Howell's The Promised Key and Prince Emmanuel's Black Supremacy, we conclude that not only is Haile Selassie I the Ba of Osar, but that Rastafari too have the potential to think and behave as the Ba of Osar. Contribution of dissertation. In Towards the Sociology of Maatian Ethics, Literature and Context, Malona Karenga writes that the duty of the sesh, or scholar, or scribe, within the Kemetic tradition is to bring about Ma'at in the world. He writes, Maatian ethics evolve in a context of social order and development, and key to their emergence is the sesh, the scholar, scribe, or bureaucrat. It is from these that the formulation of the ethical vision emerges, and it is they who advocate the attempt to bring into being the just society. Though Ma'at has multiple interrelated meanings, it can be understood as the utilization of Tehuti, divine wisdom, in thought and action to create harmony and balance, or in other words, fundamental truth between all phenomena in existence. With the express purpose of exploring the relationship between ancient and contemporary perceptions, and to bring about balance to the discussion of Rastafari thought, this work contributes to Ma'at. Of most importance here is that by demonstrating the continuity of thought, the work becomes another exemplar that relies on an African symbolic approach in the discipline of Africology to bring cohesiveness to what scholars writing on this topic, as the review of literature reveals, often deem as isolated expressions of the divine, and moreover, inauthentic expressions of the divine. This dissertation, therefore, is unapologetically both a contribution to Rastafari discourse and African-centered, Kemetic-centered intellectual work. It is therefore also a corrective to scholars who include that Rastafari thought is ahistoric and implausible. Limitations. Receiving training within the spiritual sciences and the first PhD program in African American Studies, my objective to create an argument for the possibility of the divinity of Haile Selassie within Rastafari discourse is the expression of the Kepera stage, the initial creative stage of my spiritual and intellectual development. This initial limitation, if it is one at all, is my personal relationship with the Rastafari and ancient Kemetic cosmology. I approached this dissertation having come to explore Rastafari during my teenage years as an alternative to African American Baptist and African Methodist Episcopal traditions with their European iconography and orientation. I also come to this dissertation after experiencing a year-long introductory spiritual initiation between 2000 and 2001 in the shrine of Mut-Em-Wa, Amen-Ra, and Konsu, Heru, a traveling Kemetic shrine. It is therefore my desire to locate Rastafari within the context of ancient African cosmological interpretations and to answer some of my most pressing questions concerning the possible relationship between the two. Further, my language inefficiency is, of course, a limitation. I come to this dissertation as a student within the only PhD program consistently trying to redevelop ancient African ontological and epistemological assumptions for inquiry to interpret homeland and diasporan phenomena. Writing this dissertation, then, is an experiment in the possibility of restoring ancient epistemological and ontological assumptions. Almost done on the first chapter. It is here where I locate my priorities during the expanse of my intellectual training at Temple University. The obverse of many who train within the discipline of Egyptology and acquire language efficiency in the place of cosmological, epistemological, and ontological restoration, a major limitation in this dissertation is its lack of ancient Kemetic primary sources. That is to say that I am inefficient in Medu Neter, German, and French, and therefore I am unable to rely on the plethora of primary transliterations by and for disciplinary trained Egyptologists. Another important limitation is that this work is neither historical nor expansive. While my interests for writing this dissertation deal with formulating an argument that transcends historic, apologistic, and Christological approaches, I am clear that past experiences are important in understanding contemporary phenomena. For this is our Akan Sankofa idea. However, this dissertation does not address the specificities of the Amhara Salomic dynasty of which Haile Selassie I emerges and represents, nor the relationship between Amhara Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity and Rastafari thought. Where was I? The above ideas take precedence in the work of writers comprising chapter 2 of this dissertation. Nor does this work examine the relationship between Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity and the ancient Kemetic cosmology that predates it. While all of the above would greatly enhance the historicity of my argument, I purposefully want to explore the possibility of a symbolic approach through which I can remember Osar by readings, symbols within the written primary and some secondary sources. Future work, it seems, should consider more specific relationships between Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, the ancient Kemetic cosmology, and Rastafari thought in particular. This work does not trace the expanse of Rastafari perceptions of Haile Selassie as divine. Several sources discuss Rastafari perceptions of Haile Selassie as we indicate within chapter 2. This dissertation, therefore, attempts to place the development of Rastafari thought about Haile Selassie and their initial specific conceptualizations of Haile Selassie within a Kemetic macro-cosmological context. It is within this way that this dissertation deals with limited primary Rastafari written sources instead of the expanse of secondary writings about Haile Selassie written since the coronation of Selassie in 1930. While this dissertation attempts to argue that there is some authenticity to Rastafari thinking about Selassie, several problems abound within Rastafari thinking and behaving because of continual engagement of our Kaz, or ego personality, within the Duat, the land of the departed who have been dismembered. Our final set of limitations, then, is that this dissertation does not even begin to explore the intricacies of suboptimal thinking and behaving that abounds within Rastafari thought in particular. Neither of the limitations that we shall discuss below, however, delimit the possibility that Haile Selassie is an expression of the Ba of Osar, in our contemporary movement, and that Rastafari thinking about Selassie I is an authentic perspective. Patriarchal and sexist thinking most definitely exists within Rastafari normative assumptions. For example, some Rastafari suggest that women can only begin to understand Rastafari philosophy if a king man introduces her to the specificity of Rastafari way of life. While Obiagel Lake writes extensively about this issue in Rastafari Women, Subordination in the Midst of Liberation Theology, we as African-centered thinkers must continue to theorize and re-educate and therefore add to the body of Rastafari work that challenges patriarchal perspectives within the dominant Rastafari discourse and lived experiences. Moreover, issues of heterosexism abound. For example, close examination of the lyrics of Capleton, Sizzler, and other reggae artists justify murdering same-sex desiring persons in Kingston, Jamaica. It is therefore apparent that many Rastafari harbor debilitating heterosexist perspectives, issues that are reminiscent of the West's oppressive, divisive, and non-spiritual priorities that Rastafari philosophical thinking at its core wishes to challenge. Though serious research and re-education is most definitely needed to end this heterosexist heterosexist thought and action, has a lot of spelling errors in here. This topic falls outside of the scope of authenticating Haile Selassie I as the Ba of Assar. It is possible, however, for us to rely on the cosmology to address and re-educate Rastafari, a project in which I look forward to completing in the near future. Since the 1970s and the emergence of the 12 tribes of Israel in Jamaica, Rastafari has become an international phenomenon. Resultingly, those who find Rastafari appealing range from homeland Africans to Japanese adherents. This dissertation limits its conversion to the earliest pre-coronation writings and extends its argument in relationship to the movement of the Ba of Assar within Rastafari thinking about Haile Selassie I. In this way, the dissertation remains confined to the African Rastafari experience. All of the primary source material that we have is written by Rastafari and focuses on homeland and diasporan African Rastafari. Using our symbolic approach in future work to examine the meaning of non-African people adhering to Rastafari thought is also a promising endeavor. We shall now review the most significant academic literature about Rastafari's conceptualization of Haile Selassie I. We are going to chapter 2, the problem of authenticity, Rastafari conceptualizations of Haile Selassie I in academic discourse. I will continue on chapter 2 tomorrow, and we'll continue reading this dissertation. Hopefully many of our brothers and sisters will be tuning in. I think at this point in time, as Rastafari is experiencing this growth of African-centered knowledge, we need to realign ourselves with our orientation, our primordial African cosmology. Thank you for tuning in. I hope it was an inspirational read for you. We will be continuing tomorrow with chapter 2. Ank Uja Saneb, Duanecha, Duawu Emyaku, Shemem Hotepabet. Go in peace, family.